Episode 1, The Words on the Wall. It began on a Tuesday, the kind of gray, silent morning when even the air feels uncertain. The janitor at Willow Creek Elementary was the first to see it. At 6:47 a.m., he opened room 3A and dropped his mop. Because there, written in long, uneven letters across the chalkboard, were the words, "She will drown at 3:12. The message was still wet. It ran down the board in thick, dark streaks that smelled of rust and salt. At first, everyone thought it was paint, some cruel prank by a kid who'd watched too many horror movies. But when they tested it, the liquid wasn't paint. It was blood. Human blood. And then there was the handwriting. It was small, curved, uncertain, like that of a child still learning to spell. By noon, the entire school was whispering about it. The teachers kept their voices low, the way people do when they feel something holy and dangerous breathing between them. When the police arrived, every student was called to the gym for questioning. The principal, red-eyed and trembling, pointed to a quiet boy sitting by the bleachers. "Elias Crane," she said. "He was the first one here this morning." Elias was 9 years old. Pale, polite, forgettable except for his eyes. They were the color of old stormwater, too still, too deep. When Detective Mara Hensley asked him about the message, he just stared at her hands. His voice came out soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't write it," he said. "But I saw it being written." She asked him what he meant. He looked up, and for the first time, she saw fear sharpen his expression. "It was dark," he whispered. "The room was empty. But the chalkboard moved. Like invisible fingers. And then the letters appeared one by one." The detective tried to keep her tone calm. "You mean like a ghost?" He shook his head. "No," he said. "Not a ghost. Someone who remembers." At 3:12 p.m. exactly, a scream tore through the schoolyard. One of the teachers, Ms. Dalton, had been found face down in the fountain behind the library. She'd gone out to collect her class's art projects, and somehow, slipped. When Detective Hensley arrived, the water was red with blood. The clock on the tower above them read 3:12. That night, Mara sat in her car long after everyone had left. She kept replaying Elias's words, "someone who remembers." She opened her notebook and wrote down what she knew. The time. The blood. The name. And then, just before closing it, she noticed something. On the last page, one she hadn't touched, there were words written in faint, dried red. "He will remember you next." Episode 2, The Sleepwalker. The storm came without warning that night. A thin rain began tapping against the windows of the Crane house, soft at first, then harder, like fingernails scratching at the glass. Inside, the power flickered twice, then died. At 2:37 a.m., Elias's mother, Claire, woke to a sound she couldn't place. Not thunder. Not wind. A slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip echoing from the hallway. She rose, heart pounding, and followed it barefoot into the dark. The light from her phone caught a trail, small footprints, wet and red, leading down the hall toward the back door. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened the door and stepped outside. Elias was standing in the middle of the yard. Barefoot. In his pajamas. Head tilted up to the rain. His hands were crimson to the wrists. "Elias," she cried, rushing to him. But he didn't move. His eyes were open, wide and pale, reflecting nothing. "Elias, wake up." When she grabbed him, his body was cold, unnaturally so. His lips trembled as if trying to speak, but only a single word came out. "Stop." Then he collapsed. By morning, Detective Mara Hensley was back at the house. The boy sat wrapped in a blanket, silent, staring at the floor. His fingernails were crusted with blood that wasn't his. Forensics arrived within the hour. The blood, they said, belonged to Lila Ward, a 10-year-old girl reported missing the previous evening. Her bicycle had been found abandoned at the edge of Blackthorn Woods, just 2 miles from where Elias stood in the rain. Mara crouched down beside him. "Elias," she said softly, "can you tell me what happened last night?" He didn't look up. "I was asleep." "Then how did you end up outside?" He hesitated. "I dreamed I was walking," he whispered. "Someone was calling my name." "Who?" His eyes flickered, distant. "The girl. But not the one who's gone. The one before her." Mara frowned. "The one before?" He nodded. She said it's not over. Later, when Claire tried to clean her son's hands, she found something beneath his fingernails, a thin fragment of something white. Bone. And as she scrubbed, Elias whispered something that made her drop the towel. "She was scared," he said softly. "She asked me to help her write." Claire froze. "Write what, sweetheart?" He raised his gaze slowly, the corners of his mouth trembling. "The next name." That evening, Mara sat in her car outside the house, watching the windows. In her passenger seat lay the case file for Lila Ward. At 11:14 p.m., her phone buzzed. A message. No caller ID. No text, just an image. A photograph of a wall. And on that wall, written in blood, the words, "He will walk again." The timestamp on the photo read 2:37 a.m. The same minute Elias had walked into the rain. Episode 3, The Confession Tape. The cassette was old. The kind you'd expect to find in a thrift store or an attic, wrapped in dust and silence. But this one was different. It had been left on the front steps of Willow Creek Police Station, no note, no fingerprints, no sender. Just a label, handwritten in a trembling child's script. "Play me." Detective Mara Hensley stared at it for a long time before sliding it into the recorder. The tape hissed for several seconds, the sound of static and distance. Then came the voice. A child's voice. Soft. Calm. And wrong. "My name is Elias Crane. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do." Mara froze. The voice was unmistakable, it was Elias. But his tone wasn't the hesitant whisper she'd heard before. This was steady. Controlled. Rehearsed. "They told me to write it down," the voice continued. "They said if I stop writing, they'll start again. The burning. The crying. The fire in the rooms that don't exist anymore." The sound of shallow breathing filled the tape, followed by the faint scratching of a pencil. "I'm writing names. I don't know them. But they do. They whisper them while I sleep. One by one." There was a pause. Then the voice grew quieter, almost a whisper. "The next name is Mara." The detective's blood ran cold. The recorder clicked off. For hours, the station was chaos. Forensics examined the cassette, no signs of editing, no splices, no anomalies. Yet the tape's magnetic timestamp placed its recording at 2:37 a.m., the same minute Elias had been found sleepwalking in the rain. Mara drove straight to the Crane house. Claire opened the door, eyes hollow from nights without sleep. Elias was in the living room, drawing on the floor with red crayon. He looked up when Mara entered. "You heard it," he said softly. She swallowed hard. "Elias, where did you get that tape?" His expression didn't change. "It wasn't a tape when I made it," he murmured. It was a dream. A dream? He nodded. They said dreams are easier to record. Less resistance. Later that night, Mara replayed the tape in her car. But this time, something new bled through the static. A second voice. Deep, ragged, distant. Whispering beneath Elias's. She turned up the volume until the noise almost cracked the speakers. The words were faint but clear enough to shatter her composure. She will listen 3 times. She will believe twice. And then, she will write. The tape ended with a long exhale, like the sound of someone breathing right next to her ear. Mara tore the cassette out and threw it onto the passenger seat, chest heaving. But when she looked at the rearview mirror, her reflection wasn't alone. In the darkness of the back seat, something small and pale sat perfectly still. A child's silhouette. And from the recorder, now unplugged, came a final whisper, barely audible but certain. The story has started to remember itself. Episode 4, The Painting of Thorns. No one had noticed when Elias stopped using colors. At first, his drawings were harmless houses, trees, stick figures with round smiling faces. But by the time October came, his mother found him painting in silence, using nothing but shades of rust and brown. When she asked where he got the color, he smiled. I made it myself. That night, Claire woke to the smell of iron. She followed it to the basement, where she found a dozen torn canvases scattered across the floor, each one smeared with streaks of dried red. And in the middle of them stood Elias, painting. His small hands moved in slow, deliberate circles, tracing shapes that didn't look human. Lines that bent and spiraled like vines, wrapping around faces that had no eyes. When she grabbed his shoulder, he didn't even flinch. Elias, she screamed. What are you doing? He turned, brush dripping. It's not me, he said calmly. They said they needed to see again. The next morning, Detective Mara Hensley returned to the house. Claire led her to the basement, her hands trembling. Look at this, Claire whispered. Pinned to the wall was the newest painting. It showed a woman hanging from a bridge, her hair twisting in the wind, her body surrounded by thorns. The details were hauntingly precise, even the folds of her coat. But the worst part was the face. It was unmistakably real. Mara's stomach tightened. The woman in the painting was Rebecca Lorne, a local librarian reported missing 3 days earlier. Elias sat quietly in the corner, watching them. I didn't choose her, he said. She walked too close to the river. They said it had to be her. Mara's voice wavered. Who are they, Elias? He thought for a moment. The ones who stay where the light doesn't go. They say they remember the fire. They want me to finish it. 2 days later, the call came in. Rebecca Lorne's body had been found beneath Willow Bridge, entangled in a mess of barbed wire and vines. The time of death was estimated at 3:12 a.m. The same hour Elias had woken up screaming, his hands covered in dried paint. When Mara visited him again, he was drawing something new, this time on the wall with his fingers. He didn't use paint or crayon. Just his nails. What are you drawing now? She asked quietly. Elias tilted his head. Not a picture, he said. A door. Mara stepped closer. The shapes on the wall looked like runes, old and jagged. The lines pulsed faintly, as though something underneath was breathing. It only opens, Elias whispered, when someone bleeds for it. Mara's flashlight flickered. The shadows in the corners stretched longer, reaching toward her. And for a brief, terrible moment, she saw something move within the wall itself, something that watched back. She stumbled backward, heart pounding. Elias, stop drawing. He smiled faintly, eyes unfocused. I can't, he said. They said the next one's already waiting. He looked at her, voice soft as a prayer. Do you dream, detective? And then, as her light went out completely, the outline on the wall began to drip. Episode 5, The House by the Marsh. There was a map hidden inside one of Elias's paintings. At first, Detective Mara Hensley thought it was just more chaos, crimson spirals and frantic brushstrokes, but when she held it under ultraviolet light, faint lines appeared between the layers of blood. Coordinates. They led to the marshland at the edge of town, a forgotten stretch of fog and silence where even birds refused to fly. She arrived just before dawn. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of decay and wet earth. In the distance, half sunk in the mud, stood the remains of a house, black timber skeletons and shards of roof like broken ribs. The old Willow Creek orphanage. Burned down 20 years ago. Mara's boots sank into the mud as she crossed the marsh. The house groaned in the wind, whispering its age. On one of the charred walls, she saw faint carvings, children's names etched in ash. And near the bottom, almost erased by time, Elias Crane. Inside, the air was colder than the outside mist. Her flashlight swept across melted toys, rusted bed frames, and something that looked like claw marks gouged deep into the floor. The deeper she went, the clearer the smell of smoke became, not old smoke, but fresh. Then she heard it. A soft humming. It came from upstairs, from what was once the dormitory. Every instinct told her to leave, but something like memory, pulled her forward. When she reached the room, she saw a shape sitting by the window. A child. Elias, she whispered. The figure turned. It was a boy, yes, but his skin was charred, his eyes hollow pits of red light. His mouth opened, and the humming turned into words. We remember you. Mara stumbled back, hand reaching for her gun, but the boy was gone. The window now showed only fog. Then she noticed the walls. They were covered in writing, tiny scrawled letters made from soot and something darker. She ran her gloved fingers over them. They formed sentences, endless and repeating. They promised we wouldn't burn. They promised we would wake again. Her breath hitched. Beneath the words, a faint red outline glowed, another name, half-finished. M.A.R. She froze. Behind her, the floor creaked. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then went dark. In that brief moment of blackness, she felt a small hand slip into hers. Cold. Fragile. Familiar. Elias, she whispered. The voice that answered was layered, one child, then many. Not anymore. She tore free and bolted outside, gasping for air. The marsh swallowed the sound of her footsteps, the mist curling like smoke around her face. When she looked back, the orphanage was gone. Only still water remained. That night, Mara returned to her apartment and pored over the old records. The Willow Creek Orphanage fire. 19 children dead. One survivor listed, Claire Thompson. Elias's mother. And beside the entry, in faded ink, was a note added by a former investigator. Case closed. Survivor claimed the fire was punishment. They wanted to remember through me. Mara closed the file, her pulse loud in her ears. From the corner of the room, the tape recorder clicked on by itself. Elias's voice filled the air once more. You found it, detective. But they're not trapped there anymore. She turned slowly toward the sound. And on her living room wall, written in a trembling red hand, were new words still dripping. The marsh is moving. Episode 6, The Whisper in the Vent. The nights had grown restless inside the Crane house. The air itself seemed to hum. Doors breathed. Floors sighed. And when the lights went out, the walls whispered. Claire tried to pretend it was all in her head. That the creaks and murmurs were just echoes of the storm outside. But every night, when the clock struck 3:12 a.m., she heard it, soft voices drifting through the vents. Children's voices. Detective Mara Hensley sat in her car across the street, chain-smoking and trying to make sense of her notes. The orphanage fire. The map. The name carved in soot. The whispers Elias keeps repeating, they remember. She'd seen horror before, crime scenes that left their stench on her skin, but nothing like this. This felt organized. Intentional. At 2:58 a.m., she looked up from her notebook. The lights in the Crane house flickered. Then, a shadow moved across the upstairs window, small, sharp, crawling. Mara grabbed her flashlight and ran. Claire was in the hallway when she heard the first voice call her name. It came from the vent above the floorboards, gentle and childlike. Mommy! Her breath caught. She knelt down, trembling fingers brushing the metal grill. Elias? Mommy, it's cold in here. Her eyes filled with tears. Sweetheart, where are you? No answer. Only a faint scraping from inside the duct, like fingernails dragging slowly through dust. Then another voice joined. Lower. Older. He's not your son anymore. Claire screamed and stumbled backward as the vent clattered open on its own. A rush of freezing air poured out, and for a moment, just a moment, she saw them. Tiny faces behind the slats. Burned. Hollow. Watching. When Mara burst through the door, the air was thick with smoke though nothing burned. Claire was on the floor, clutching Elias to her chest. He was shaking violently, his lips moving but no sound coming out. Mara knelt beside him. Elias, talk to me. What did you hear? He looked at her, eyes wide and wet. They're inside the walls now, he whispered. They said they were tired of remembering. Remembering what? He pointed to the vent. The fire. The promise. They said the fire was supposed to end it, but it didn't. Later, after getting them to safety, Mara returned alone. The house was silent. Still. She crouched before the vent and turned on her recorder. Elias, if you can hear me, she began. But the whisper that answered wasn't Elias. We can all hear you, detective. The flashlight in her hand flickered violently. The vent's metal began to buckle inward, like something on the other side was pushing. Hard. Mara stumbled back. The light burst. The air turned to ice. And then, from the dark, came a faint child's giggle followed by a whisper that crawled into her ear and stayed there like breath. You left one of us behind. She turned toward the sound, trembling. The wall behind her was bleeding. Words formed as the blood ran down in thin, deliberate lines. The house remembers you. At dawn, Mara drove away from Willow Creek, her windows rolled down as if the night could follow her. But as she reached the outskirts of town, she heard a small, steady voice coming through her car's air vent. A whisper. Familiar. Detective, do you dream? Episode 7, The Mirror That Lied. The mirror in Elias's room had never been anything special. A cheap, rectangular piece of glass framed with dull wood, old enough to distort faces when the light hit wrong. But 3 days after the whispers began, Claire noticed something she couldn't explain. Elias stopped casting a reflection. It wasn't sudden, it faded, piece by piece. First his hands blurred, then his shoulders, until only his outline remained, like fog trapped behind the glass. At first, Claire blamed the lighting, the dust, her exhaustion. But that night, when she looked into the mirror herself, she saw something standing behind her, small, pale, and smiling. When she turned around, the room was empty. Detective Mara Hensley arrived the next morning. She hadn't slept. The whisper in her car vent still echoed inside her skull, faint and rhythmic like a child humming underwater. Claire met her at the door. "He won't go near it now," she said, voice thin with fear. "He says it watches him." Mara followed her upstairs. The mirror stood opposite the bed, faintly fogged from within, though the glass was cold. Elias sat in the corner, knees pulled to his chest. "Elias," Mara said softly, "what did you see?" He didn't answer. His gaze stayed fixed on the glass. "Elias?" He raised a shaking finger and pointed. "She's still there." Mara turned to the mirror. For a moment, she saw nothing but her own reflection. Then, movement. A flicker. The faint outline of a little girl standing beside her reflection, eyes black, mouth open in a silent scream. Mara spun around. No one. But when she looked back, her reflection hadn't moved. It still faced the mirror, frozen mid-turn, eyes wide and terrified. The glass rippled, as if stirred by unseen hands. Then letters began to form across the surface, letters written backward, scrawled in something dark and wet. "She is lying." Claire covered her mouth. "What does it mean?" Elias's voice was barely a whisper. "They said mirrors are the only things that remember faces. That's why they use them." "Use them for what?" Mara asked. He looked up. "To come back." That night, Mara took the mirror into her car, wrapped in a blanket. She couldn't risk leaving it with the Cranes. The glass occasionally pulsed faintly, as though breathing. She drove to the police impound lot, parked, and stared at it under the dim light of the dashboard. Her reflection stared back, still, expressionless. Then, slowly, her reflection smiled. Her real mouth didn't move. Her pulse roared in her ears. The reflection raised a hand and pressed its palm to the inside of the glass. A faint crack spread from the center, thin, deliberate, like a spider spinning its first web. Mara forced herself to look closer. Etched inside the fracture lines were words, microscopic but clear. "The next name is yours." The reflection's mouth began to move, forming silent syllables. For a second, she thought it said Elias. But when she leaned closer, she realized it wasn't speaking his name. It was whispering hers. Over and over. "Mara. Mara. Mara." The crack deepened, splitting across her reflection's throat. From the other side of the mirror came a sound like breath drawn through broken glass, a sigh, or the beginning of a scream. Mara dropped the mirror. It shattered into 1,000 pieces. But in every shard, her reflection kept moving, eyes wide open, whispering soundlessly from the floor. Back at the Crane house, Elias woke screaming. Claire rushed to him. "They're angry," he cried, clutching his chest. "You broke their window." "What window?" He looked at her with tears streaming down his face. "The one they were using to get out." Episode 8, The Mother's Secret. The morning after the mirror shattered, Claire Crane buried the shards in the garden. She dug until her hands bled, whispering prayers she didn't believe in anymore. Elias watched from his bedroom window, silent and pale, as if he already knew the truth. That it wasn't over. By nightfall, the house had grown colder. The vents no longer whispered, the mirrors no longer reflected. But the silence that replaced them was worse. It was listening. Claire sat at the kitchen table with a box she hadn't opened in 20 years. Its lid was wrapped in black tape, its edges warped by heat and time. Inside were newspaper clippings. The orphanage fire, the children's names, the one survivor. Horror. When she'd been 17, she'd escaped the flames. Or maybe she hadn't. The memories had holes, and through those holes, something had always watched her. Something that whispered in the smoke, "Promise you won't forget us." She hadn't forgotten. She'd given birth instead. Detective Mara Hensley arrived just before midnight. She hadn't slept in days. The image of her own reflection whispering her name still haunted the back of her eyelids. "Claire," she said quietly, "I need to know what happened in that fire." Claire didn't look up. "They told me the fire was an accident. That's what the papers said. But it wasn't." "Then what was it?" Claire's eyes were hollow. "A ritual. To seal the children away. The matron said they'd been chosen. Their souls were too heavy to let go, so she made a pact to trap them, to keep them from wandering. It worked, until that night." She reached into the box and pulled out a photo, blackened, brittle. It showed the orphanage's dormitory. In the background, faint but visible, was a shadow, a child's outline drawn on the wall and something dark. Beneath it, written in ash, were the words, "We'll be born again." Mara's throat went dry. "And Elias?" Claire nodded slowly. "He was born 9 months later. On the anniversary of the fire." Upstairs, Elias stood before his bedroom wall. He had drawn something again, a circle of handprints, small and uneven, pressed into the plaster. When Mara entered, she froze. There were 19 of them. "The other children," Elias said softly. "They want to come through." "Through what?" He turned to her with an expression that wasn't entirely his. "Through me." The lights flickered. The house groaned like an old body exhaling. And from beneath the floorboards came a sound, tiny fists knocking, rhythmically, impatiently. Claire screamed, covering her ears. "Stop it. Please stop." Elias smiled faintly, his voice layered, one tone his, the other's countless. "You promised, Mother." Mara lunged forward, grabbing the boy by the shoulders. "Elias! Fight them!" But his eyes had gone black. His lips parted, and from his mouth came a breath that wasn't air, it was ash. He whispered something that chilled Mara to her bones. "She made us remember. Now it's her turn." The lights died. The knocking grew louder, faster. From the basement, the earth began to move. When Mara reached the door, it was already open. A smell of burnt fabric and blood rose from below. And in the darkness at the bottom of the stairs, 19 small shapes waited. Some burned, some broken, all smiling. Claire fell to her knees. "I did what they asked," she sobbed. "I gave them life again." One of the figures stepped forward, its face melted into the shape of a child and yet far older than time itself. "Yes," it whispered. "You gave us life. But not peace." Mara raised her flashlight. The beam trembled. On the wall behind them, fresh blood spelled out a single word. "Remember." Episode 9, The Blood Diary. They found the diary under Elias's bed. It wasn't a notebook at first glance, just a bundle of yellowed pages bound with twine and something that looked disturbingly like hair. The cover was stiff, as if made from dried leather. When Detective Mara Hensley brushed her gloved fingers across it, the surface felt warm. There was no title, only a symbol burned into the front, a small circle surrounded by 19 uneven handprints. Claire stood in the doorway, pale as chalk. "I didn't know it was there," she whispered. "He said the house gave it to him." Mara didn't answer. She untied the knot and opened the first page. The words weren't written in ink. They glistened, dark red and sticky. Day 1, they remembered their names. The letters shimmered as she read them, as if the blood were still fresh. The next pages told fragments of something older than memory, the fire, the pact, the promise. But every few entries, the handwriting changed, some shaky like a child's, others elegant and looping, none belonging to Elias. And on the newest page, dated the night before, was a sentence that made her stomach twist. "Tomorrow, the detective will write." Mara shut the diary and exhaled. "Elias," she said softly, "where did you get this?" The boy was sitting by the window, staring into the rain. "It wasn't mine," he said. "It's theirs. They said every story needs someone to finish it." "Finish what?" "The remembering." He looked down at his hands. His fingernails were dark, as if stained from the inside. "They said you'll understand when it starts writing back." That night, Mara took the diary with her to the motel outside Willow Creek. She couldn't risk leaving it behind. She placed it on the desk beside her recorder and poured herself a drink. The pages fluttered on their own. The window was shut, the air still. Yet the diary breathed slow, wet, like lungs soaked in mud. Her reflection in the window began to blur. She opened the book again. A new line had appeared beneath the last one. "You shouldn't have taken us away." The letters thickened, spreading across the page like veins. She dropped the glass. It shattered. The sound didn't echo. Something inside the pages began to move, shifting, pushing against the paper as if trying to get out. She slammed the diary shut, heart hammering, but blood began seeping from between the covers. She backed away, watching as the book pulsed once, twice, and fell still. Then her phone buzzed. A message. Unknown number. A single image. The photo showed her motel room, same bed, same desk, same flickering lamp, but with one difference. In the photo, she was sitting on the bed, head bowed, writing in the diary. And the caption beneath it read, "Day 10, the detective remembers." Panicking, Mara turned to the desk. The diary was open again. She hadn't touched it. The handwriting on the newest page wasn't Elias's, nor any of the others. It was hers. Outside, the rain turned black against the glass. And in the reflection, behind her trembling face, 19 small silhouettes stood waiting. "Keep writing," they whispered. "We're almost home." Episode 10, The Stranger Who Knew Too Much. The man arrived at dawn. He wore a long, black coat slick with rain and carried a weathered leather Bible that looked older than he was. He didn't knock. He stood on the Crane's porch as if he had always been there, waiting for the house to remember him. Claire opened the door halfway, gripping a crucifix that trembled in her hand. "Mrs. Crane," the man said. His voice was calm, hollow, like it had traveled too far to still sound human. "My name is Father Gabriel Marin. I believe your son is in great danger." She stared at him, unsure whether to slam the door or collapse. "Everyone who comes here says that," she whispered. He nodded, rain dripping from his hair. "And how many of them are still alive?" Detective Mara Hensley arrived minutes later, startled to find the priest already seated in the living room. Elias sat across from him, pale and motionless. Mara eyed the man. "And who exactly called you, Father?" He opened the Bible. The pages were warped, stained dark around the edges like they'd been soaked in smoke. "I was sent," he said. "I've seen this before." Elias's head lifted slowly. "The fire?" he asked. Father Marin met his gaze. "No." "What came after?" He spoke of the mark of the forgotten, a curse that bound the souls of children to the one who survived them. The survivor became the vessel, carrying their hunger, their grief, their need to be remembered. When the survivor bears a child, the priest said, the spirits pass into new flesh. They remember their death through blood. Mara frowned. So you're saying Elias is? The next host, he interrupted. The fire burned their bodies, not their memory. They've been writing ever since, searching for someone who'll finish their story. He turned a page in the Bible. Inside, instead of verses, there were drawings, symbols burned into parchment, identical to the markings Elias had scrawled on the walls. Claire covered her mouth. You knew about them, before us? I've seen their work, he said softly. In Romania. In a convent that burned in 1892. In a farmhouse in Chile, where a boy painted his own grave before dying. They always leave 19 marks. Mara felt her skin crawl. What happens if they finish? The priest's eyes darkened. Then they remember everything. The fire. The pain. The promise. And they make someone else forget. From the corner of the room, Elias spoke in a voice that wasn't quite his. Father, he whispered, they say you're lying. The priest froze. What did you say? They said you failed before. You tried to stop them once, but you helped them instead. Mara's hand instinctively went to her holster. What's he talking about? Father Marin's face went pale. You don't understand. That was a long time ago. Elias rose slowly from his chair. His eyes were black, glossy, like the surface of deep water. They remember you too, he said. The lights flickered. The air turned cold. The crucifix in Claire's hand bent in half with a sharp metallic crack. Marin staggered back, clutching his chest. The Bible fell open at his feet, its pages fluttering wildly. Blood began seeping through the text, forming words across the floorboards. He never left the fire. When the lights came back, Father Marin was gone. All that remained was his Bible, smoldering quietly in a pool of blackened blood. Elias stood in the doorway, whispering to something unseen. Mara stepped toward him, voice shaking. Elias, who are you talking to? He turned slowly, his lips curling into a faint, eerie smile. The one who remembers what the fire forgot. Episode 11, The Grave with Two Names. The grave wasn't supposed to exist. Not anymore. Not after the fire. Detective Mara Hensley found it by accident, deep within the Willow Creek Cemetery, a sunken plot overgrown with weeds, marked by a single weathered stone. The rain had softened the ground, exposing half-buried letters carved into the granite. She brushed the dirt away with trembling fingers. Elias Crane, 1989 to 1998. Her breath caught. That couldn't be right. The Elias she knew had been born in 2016. She leaned closer, and beneath the inscription, in smaller, faded lettering, was a second name. Claire Thompson. His mother. Both names. On the same grave. By the time she returned to the Crane house, the storm had grown violent. The sky flashed white every few seconds, revealing the house like a corpse illuminated by lightning. She found Claire in the kitchen, staring at nothing, her hands gripping a mug of cold tea. Claire, Mara said softly, did you know about the grave? No response. Claire, she repeated, why are both your names on it? Slowly, Claire lifted her eyes. Because that's where I buried us. Mara froze. What do you mean? Claire's voice cracked. After the fire, they told me I was the only survivor. But that wasn't true. I died with them that night. Or part of me did. When I came back, I wasn't alone anymore. Her hands began to tremble. They said I had to keep their memory alive. That's why they gave me a son. So I wouldn't forget." She looked up, eyes hollow. "But it isn't him, detective. It never was." A sound echoed from upstairs, soft, dragging footsteps across the wooden floor. Mara's instincts flared. She drew her weapon and climbed the stairs slowly. The corridor smelled of damp ash and iron. The door to Elias's room was ajar. Inside, the boy sat on the floor beside his bed, a candle flickering beside him. In front of him was a photograph, the same grave, freshly dug, mud still clinging to the name. Mara whispered, "Where did you get that?" Elias smiled faintly. "I took it today." Her pulse spiked. You were at the cemetery?" He nodded. "They wanted me to see it. They said it's where the remembering ends." "Who's they, Elias?" He tilted his head. "The ones who were buried wrong." Suddenly, the candle's flame twisted, turning black. The air thickened with the scent of burnt soil. Elias's voice dropped, layered and ancient. "They said she wasn't supposed to live. She stole their breath. Their names." "Elias, stop. They said you'll have to trade one to keep the other." Mara's hand tightened on her gun. "Trade who?" He looked up. His eyes glowed faintly red. "Horror!" Claire screamed from downstairs. The lights shattered. When Mara reached the kitchen, the windows had exploded inward, the air filled with freezing mist. Claire was standing in the center of the room, her face streaked with tears, and behind her, a second figure. It looked like her, but younger. Burned. Half of its face gone. The figure whispered in a voice that was both hers and not hers. "You left us in the fire, Claire. Now we're taking him back." Claire dropped to her knees. "Please, not him." The figure smiled faintly. "Then you." Mara fired once. The figure burst into ash. But when the smoke cleared, there were two bodies on the floor. Both of them were Claire. One breathing. One not. The boy appeared in the doorway, holding the candle. His voice was steady now, emotionless. "Every grave has two names," he said. "One for the body. One for the memory." He looked at Mara, eyes glinting like glass. "And now you have yours." Mara turned toward the wall, and there, written in white crimson, was a new inscription forming letter by letter. Mara Hensley, 1989 to 2024. Episode 12, The Room That Remembered. Hospitals are supposed to be places that forget. They bleach their walls, replace the sheets, scrub the floors until every trace of the past is erased. But there are rooms, quiet corners where time doesn't wash clean, rooms that remember. Detective Mara Hensley didn't want to stay overnight at St. Agnes Hospital. But the doctors insisted. The shock, they said, the trauma of what she'd seen. They didn't understand this wasn't trauma. It was recognition. Room 313. That's where they placed her. A small, windowless chamber at the end of a flickering hallway. The nurse who led her there avoided eye contact, as if the number itself carried weight. "It's just for the night," the nurse said. "Try to rest." Mara didn't answer. Because the moment she stepped into the room, the air changed. The lights hummed low, vibrating like a held breath. And on the far wall, beneath a thin layer of peeling paint, something dark bled through. Letters. Not written on the wall, but inside it. "Remember." She sat on the bed, staring. Her reflection glimmered faintly in the black TV screen. She looked older than she had yesterday, though she wasn't sure how many days had actually passed. When the clock struck 3:12 a.m., the lights dimmed. The television turned on by itself. Static. Then, faintly, the image of a boy. Elias. He was sitting in a hospital bed identical to hers, lips moving soundlessly. The screen flickered. Elias? Mara whispered. His voice came through, distorted, like radio through water. They remember this room. She stood, heart pounding. What do you mean? The image glitched, doubled, then steadied. This is where they were kept before the fire. The ones who didn't make it upstairs. The static rose again, swallowing his face. They said you'd come. And then the screen went black. Mara turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. The handle felt hot. A smell of smoke seeped in from under the frame. She spun around, and the writing on the wall had changed. Sit. Her knees buckled. She fell onto the bed. The lights flickered, pulsing to the rhythm of her heartbeat. And slowly, the room began to move, not shake, breathe. From beneath the wallpaper, faint handprints pressed outward, pushing against the surface from the inside. Small hands. 19 of them. A child's whisper echoed through the vent. We lived here before the fire. The matron said the walls would protect us. The wallpaper began to peel. Beneath it, blackened plaster revealed hundreds of tiny names scratched into the surface. Each one written over and over until the letters blurred into wounds. Elias's voice returned, closer this time. They never left, detective. They're just waiting for someone to open the door again. The air thickened. She could taste iron. Blood began seeping from the seams of the wall, running down in thin red veins. And then, as if someone whispered directly into her ear, a voice she recognized said, "It's your turn to remember." Mara gasped. The mirror on the wall flashed. In its reflection, she wasn't alone. Behind her stood the 19 burned children, their eyes black pits of smoke. And in front of them, Elias. He raised his hand. "This is where it began," he said softly. "And this is where it ends." The children stepped forward. Their fingers reached for the walls. The hospital alarm blared, distant and distorted, but inside room 313, there was no sound. Only the slow echo of 19 voices whispering one word, over and over, as the lights faded to red. Remember. Episode 13, The Echo of the Fire. Fire doesn't end things. It only changes what they look like. Detective Mara Hensley learned that when she woke up in the hospital parking lot, her hands blistered, her hair smelling of smoke, though room 313 had never burned. The staff said the power had gone out, that she'd wandered outside in shock. But she remembered the sound of children screaming. She remembered them. And she remembered Elias, standing in the flames, smiling as the walls breathed. 3 nights later, Mara returned to Willow Creek. The town looked smaller now, as if it were shrinking away from the marsh. Every window was dark, every house whispering its own version of the same secret. The orphanage ruins were waiting for her, half buried under fog. But this time, she wasn't alone. Claire Crane was there, barefoot in the mud, her face streaked with ash. She turned as Mara approached. "You shouldn't have come," Claire said quietly. "You're here," Mara replied. "I was born here," Claire whispered. "And so was he." She pointed to the blackened foundation where the children's dormitory used to be. "This is where it started. The matron said if they burned, they'd be free. But they didn't want freedom. They wanted memory." Mara crouched beside a patch of scorched earth. Something metallic gleamed in the mud. She dug with her hands until her fingers touched it, a locket. Inside, a photograph of 19 children, smiling stiffly in their uniforms. Behind them, faint and blurred, was a figure standing in shadow. Claire's face went pale. "That's not the matron," she whispered. "That's him." "Who?" Claire shuddered. "The one who came before the fire. The one who taught them to write." Mara frowned. "Write what?" Claire met her gaze, tears filling her eyes. "The words that keep them alive." The wind shifted. Smoke rose from the ground, curling into shapes, small bodies, burned faces, eyes like coals. Then Elias's voice drifted from the ruins. "You finally remembered." He stepped into view, barefoot, his clothes untouched by mud or ash. The air around him shimmered, bending with heat. Mara raised her gun, though her hand shook. "Elias," she said, "it doesn't have to end like this." He smiled faintly. It already did. The ground trembled. The ruins glowed red beneath the fog. Flames began to bloom from nowhere, slow, beautiful, deliberate. "They're waking up," he said softly. "They've been dreaming of this night since the fire." "Elias, listen to me," Mara pleaded. "You don't have to." But he wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on Claire. "You promised, Mother," he whispered. "You said we'd never burn again." Claire fell to her knees. "Please." "I didn't know. I didn't mean for this." The flames thickened, crawling up her arms, but she didn't scream. She looked at Elias through the fire and said, "Then let me remember for you." For a heartbeat, the boy's expression softened, childlike, almost human. Then he nodded. And the fire roared. When it was over, the marsh was silent. No ruins. No screams. No Claire. Only Elias, standing amid the ashes, watching the embers fade. He turned to Mara and smiled faintly. Now they'll remember her instead. Before she could move, he stepped backward into the smoke. And vanished. At dawn, Mara found herself alone. The earth was cool again, the air heavy with the scent of burnt wood. In the ashes at her feet lay something small and red. She bent to pick it up. It was a fragment of paper. One sentence scrawled across it in dried blood. "Fire is not the end. It's the echo." Episode 14, The Child in the Tape. The police archivist said it didn't exist. No such evidence. No such case file. But Detective Mara Hensley knew what she'd heard. The confession tape, the one that had first spoken her name, was missing from evidence storage. And yet, that night, it appeared on the seat of her car, neatly wrapped in white cloth. A single word written across the fabric in red. Play. She drove to an abandoned service station on the outskirts of town, where the fog rolled thick enough to hide the moon. She brought her old recorder, the same one that had played the first tape. Her fingers hesitated over the button. She told herself she just wanted to confirm it existed. That was the lie she believed. When she pressed play, the tape hissed, then crackled with distant static, like a radio transmission coming from underwater. And then the voice began. "Hello, Detective." It was Elias. But his tone was different, slower, older, almost weary. "You keep looking for me," the voice said. "But you can't find someone who was never born." Mara swallowed hard. "Elias, what do you want?" The speaker answered. "I want you to remember what you did." The sound warped, faint echoes of children's laughter filled the background, distant and distorted. The recorder trembled in her hand. "You came here before," the voice said. "You saw the fire. You heard them screaming. But you forgot. Her pulse quickened. No. I wasn't even alive then. Weren't you? The tape crackled, and another voice joined hers. Her own voice. They're coming through the walls. I can't stop them. Mara froze. Her recorded voice continued. I shouldn't have signed it. The report was fake. They said the bodies were gone, but they weren't. We just buried the building. The static rose again, shrieking, drowning out her breath. She slammed stop. But the tape didn't stop. Her reflection in the car window flickered. In the glass, she wasn't sitting anymore, she was standing in a burning hallway, a badge melted to her chest, a child's hand clinging to hers. Elias's voice filled the car once more, soft and clear. You tried to save one of us. The smallest one. You pulled him from the fire. Mara shook her head. No, that's not true. It is. You saved him. But when he looked at you, he saw your name. The recorder clicked. The tape hissed, and then a faint child's voice whispered directly into her ear, so close it felt like breath. You saved me, detective. That's why I remember you. The headlights flickered on by themselves. In their glow, Mara saw movement, a figure standing at the edge of the fog. Small. Barefoot. Elias. She stepped out of the car. The fog curled around her ankles, cold and heavy. The boy's eyes gleamed faintly in the dark. Elias, she said, voice trembling, why are you showing me this? He smiled a fragile, sad smile. Because you were the one who lit the fire. Her heart stopped. What did you say? He took a step closer. You were there. You were the one who signed the order. You just don't remember it anymore. He placed his small, burned hand on her wrist. That's why I wrote your name last. The world tilted. The fog pulsed. The car lights dimmed. And when she looked down, the tape recorder had melted into the asphalt, still whispering beneath the hiss of static. You will remember when it burns again. Episode 15, the final sentence. The fire started again, quietly. No explosion. No warning. Just a whisper of smoke rising from the marsh where the orphanage once stood, curling into the night like a breath long held and finally released. From miles away, Detective Mara Hensley saw it from the highway, a faint orange shimmer beneath the fog. The same color that haunted her dreams. The same light that had followed her since she met the boy. She turned the car around. Back to Willow Creek. Back to the beginning. When she reached the ruins, the flames were already spreading, slow and deliberate, moving against the wind as if choosing where to burn. The ground pulsed beneath her boots. And in the center of the fire stood Elias. His white shirt was untouched by ash. His eyes, dark and endless, reflected the flames like mirrors. You said I started it, Mara shouted through the roar. You said I was the one who lit the fire. Elias tilted his head, almost curious. You did, he said softly. Every time you remember, it starts again. I don't understand. You will. He gestured to the flames. They parted, revealing something half-buried beneath the earth, a typewriter, blackened but intact. Its keys were slick with blood, its ribbon still glistening wet. Mara stepped closer. The letters on the keys weren't letters anymore, they were names. Claire. Elias. 19 children. And hers. She reached for the final key M and the typewriter shuddered, striking the page on its own. The paper rolled up. Fresh words appeared, one by one. The one who listens will die. Mara staggered back. That's what was written before on the walls, on the tape. What does it mean? Elias smiled. It means you've been writing our story all along. The air cracked. The flames rose higher, swirling around them like a living thing. Elias's voice deepened, layered now, 19 voices speaking through him. You carried the fire inside you. You brought us back. Mara fell to her knees, clutching her head as memories flooded in. She saw the orphanage as it was, the screaming, the matron sealing the doors, and herself, younger, standing outside with the match in her hand. The official order stamped with her name, evacuate and burn. They'd told her it was mercy. That the children were already dead. They had lied. She dropped the typewriter. What do you want from me? She screamed. Elias stepped forward, his face flickering between child and shadow. We want you to finish it. The flames parted again, and in the clearing, a single sheet of paper lay waiting. Blank. Mara stared at it, trembling. The typewriter behind her began to click on its own, words appearing faster than thought. Day 19, the detective remembers. The ground split open. The fire roared like applause. Elias reached out his hand. All stories end with a name. Mara looked into his eyes. Whose name? He smiled, a terrible, sorrowful smile. Yours. The next morning, the fire was gone. The marsh was nothing but ash. Rescue crews found a single page among the ruins. It was damp with blood, the words smeared but legible. The Child Who Wrote in Blood, by Detective Mara Hensley. And in the police archives, where the evidence boxes sat gathering dust, one new tape appeared overnight. Labeled in a child's handwriting. Play me. When the archivist pressed play, a small voice spoke, calm, familiar. Hello. My name is Mara. I'm sorry for what I'm about to do. Then came the scratching of a pencil on paper. And the sound of someone beginning to write.
Epilogue, the story that wrote itself. They say stories die when the last word is written. But this one didn't. The tape kept spinning. Long after the voice stopped, long after the sound faded into static, the reel kept turning, as if it was waiting for someone else to speak. When the archivist tried to remove it from the recorder, the tape wouldn't come out. It had fused itself to the spool, the plastic warped and sticky with something dark. He left it overnight on his desk. By morning, he was gone. And in his place was a note, written in uneven red strokes. You shouldn't have listened. 2 months later, Willow Creek was declared uninhabitable. The fire had returned again, twice. No bodies. No survivors. Only walls covered in names that didn't belong to anyone alive. Reporters called it a curse. Locals said the town had been erased to make room for a story that wouldn't end. They were both right. Somewhere, in a storage facility far from the ruins, a single evidence box remains sealed. Inside it lies the melted recorder, the blood-stained diary, the cracked mirror. And on top of everything else, folded neatly, a single sheet of paper. The Child Who Wrote in Blood. By Detective Mara Hensley. Below the title, new words have begun to appear, letter by letter, without ink or pen. A confession. A continuation. They said if I keep writing, they'll let me stop dreaming. And if you listen closely, if you ever find yourself in a quiet room when the clock hits 3:12 a.m., you might hear it too. The faint scratch of pencil on paper. The whisper of a child finishing a sentence. A voice, calm and near, speaking as if directly beside you. It's your turn now. The sound of writing pauses. And somewhere, out of sight, a new page turns.